It's a pleasure to be back with another podcast, and even more of a pleasure to welcome today's guest. She is an integral figure in presenting and reporting on the boxing for TNT Sport, which I've been across a lot of lately. She also works on the football, which has seen her travel across Europe as soon as this week. So, with how busy she's been, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Becky Ives. Becky, you've had so much on in these last few days. I'm surprised you're even doing a podcast, to be honest. How's it
Oh, no, not at all. Thank you for that very nice intro. Integral. When you said I was integral, I felt very honored.
going?
No, it is. It's super busy. It is relentless, but I will take it. I am so grateful. And yeah, when you messaged and said you want to do a podcast, I was like, sure, why not? We can fit it in. There's enough time in the day for everything.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I wanted to start off with the upcoming boxing card on Saturday, which many people are labeling as the greatest boxing card of all time. We've got the rematch between Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol, a co-main of Daniel Dubois and Joseph Parker, and there are so many other brilliant fights out in Riyadh, Saudi this weekend. You are going to be there, I believe.
I'm not going to Saudi this time. No, we're actually going to do it. We're going to present it from the studio in London. We do have commentators on site. So Darren Fletcher will be there, Richie Woodall, JD Dyer, a reporter will be there. I think Steve Bunce will be there as well. But we're actually going to be in the studio this time. So we'll be kind of throwing back and forth.
Okay, flying. I guess that makes it a lot easier. And well, how's the sleep pattern? I was going to say, because you need to sort of adjust that to Saudi time, don't you?
Well, you do, but in actual fact, when you present the cards from London, it's actually all right because you start on air at 4 p.m. because the time difference is 3 hours. So they start at 7, so we'll start at 4. So when it gets to the back end of the night, when you're in Saudi, you don't come off air till 3:30 in the morning. The ring walks tend to be around 2 a.m. And you've started on air at 7. Well, you started on air at 7. I've done rehearsals and pre-records from 5, and then I've been in makeup probably started getting ready about 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So the days are so long for
Yeah.
these Saudi cards. So I think, and it's kind of funny with these Saudi cards because you start on at 7 and you've got full of energy and you're like, oh great, this is going really well, and you think, oh, I'm doing some of my best work here. But then as the night goes on and it starts to get later and later, you know, naturally your energy at sort of midnight when you've been going since 7, you're like, oh come on, keep it going. And that's the time when it's going to the main event where the most people are watching, so that's almost where you need to be on your A game
Yeah.
even more than when you come on at 4. So in terms of the timings, doing it from London is probably better because we start on air and I'll finish probably around midnight, I would say. Whereas in Saudi, it would be more like 7 till 3:30 in the morning. But obviously, being in London, you don't quite get the same atmosphere as what you do as when you're actually in the venue and at the event. But you know what? It's a different way of doing it, and the fights will still look exactly the same on the telly.
Yeah, of course. And I guess when the cards are as good as what they have been recently, it doesn't really take much to get up for it. So in terms of the card itself this time round, the last crescendo, it's being labelled. You're looking forward to it.
Oh my God, isn't it insane?
Yeah.
Insane. When that was announced, I had to double take. I was like, is this a joke?
Yeah.
And I think it's just because there's so many world title fights, and any one of those fights on that card would sell an arena in its own right.
Yeah.
So I think it was just like, oh my God, these are the fights that people have wanted to see because the matchups are so close. It's, sometimes with boxing, you can look at a card and go, okay, well, he's going to win and he should win. That'll go the distance. I reckon he'll get him out early. But with this one, you look at it and you go, genuinely have no idea which way certain fights will go this time. And you just hope that they all go the distance and they're all super close. And I feel like this card especially. I mean, I saw Carl Frampton was posting on Instagram about it, saying it's the best card of like his lifetime. Two-way former world champ who's been involved in tons of bouts himself. He's been to more boxing events and cards than I could possibly imagine. So for him to be saying things like, this is the best one of my lifetime, that's where you're like, okay, yeah, this is like the serious business now. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be great.
On the at the public workouts yesterday, Bernard Hopkins, the legend, he was saying that all the way down the card, it's so hard to call the winners and the losers because it could easily go either way, both sides. So in terms of, as I mentioned, since sort of the advent of Riyadh season, the quality of the cards that we've been seeing is just ridiculous. We are seeing the best fight the best, and it's such a wonderful time to experience as a fan of the sport. So how does this rank in terms of the ones that you've been lucky enough to cover in recent years?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely up there in terms of fights, in terms of the card itself. I think for me personally, you have like different experiences on different things. So for me personally, Fury Usyk will always hold the place in my heart that I was like, okay, this is incredible because it was the first time, the first fight, especially back in May. Um, I was drafted in last minute. I will sort of disclaimer that. I was covering the lovely and brilliant Laura Woods. So I was kind of put in at the last minute with that. But then, that happens in this biz and you've just got to like take the chances when they come. So I think for me doing that first fight, Fury Usyk, I feel like it was the first one, the first Riyadh season card where it was like two fighters that had never lost. It was the first one that was really like, okay, we've been waiting for this one. It obviously got cancelled the first time because Fury got the cut on his eye. And I just think the anticipation about maybe it was the anticipation around that fight of what on earth was going to happen that made it even more special, I would say. And it was such a great fight card for Frank Warren and Queensberry fighters just in general. It was just quite an exciting time and card. So I just think that that card for me, the main event on that for Fury Usyk the first time was unbelievable. And then just the way the fight played out as well. It just lived up to every hope and expectation that I think we had on that. But this card, absolutely, in terms of the undercard, I mean, you're calling it an undercard, but as I said, like any of those fights could sell out arenas in themselves. So in terms of the actual fight cards, this one coming up Feb 22nd, hands down the best one there's ever been.
Yeah, certainly. And as I say, with me covering a lot of the boxing in recent months, one of the standout features for me of the production is the punditry from like Steve Burns, Carl Frampton, who you often steer the show in between.
Yeah.
What are they like to work with? Because I think that's quite an interesting balance of personalities to have to deal with.
Incredible. And you know what? When I came into the boxing, they welcomed me like I couldn't believe almost. I was just like, they were so helpful. They were kind. They are caring. They are really funny as well. They're just great human beings. Like they are just great people. And obviously Buncey has seen and done absolutely everything. And yet he just has no airs and graces about him. He'll come in, he'll be like, "You're okay, what's going on?" And I remember at the beginning, he's always so kind. He's like, "You need to message me or ask me anything at all." And just to have that fountain between the two of them as well, because obviously Carl with a 2-weight former world champ, like the experiences that those two have, I know I can throw anything at them and they are going to have an answer. And to know that they understand how broadcasting works, to know that there's simple things like, talking to pictures when the pictures roll and they're just giving their analysis and they understand how the broadcast works and what needs and they feed off each other because they're great friends as well. And it just makes the whole atmosphere so calm, so relaxed, sort of. And we all just have our own little roles. Like I steer the conversation, turn the corners when we've got to go in a different direction, and they just flow. And you know what? They absolutely love what they do. They are so good at what they do, and they love what they do. And I think when you have those two things as a combination, combined with them just being thoroughly great people, it just works. And I feel like it always just worked from the start. And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you can get a guest where you're like, oh gosh, you're like, I don't really relate too much to you. And it can be a bit like tricky and a bit awkward. And that's fine because that's just different personalities. And sometimes when you get different personalities and you are just put together on certain shows, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But with the boxing and those two, I just feel like, for me anyway, they may say different, but for me, I just felt it really clicked with the two of them. And Buncey's just got brilliant stories. They both do. I could sit and listen to them all day just about their stories, their experiences. And yeah, we're just a really fun team. But also the wider team around that as well. Like Fletch on comms, Richie Woodall on comms, JD's reporter, Danny Jameson's done some like, and obviously Laura, I've worked with Laura where I've been the reporter, she's the presenter. It's just like that boxing team is just really fun and really lovely. And we just have such a great time doing it. Our producer, Jason McCarthy, again, is like so top tier. Nothing stresses him ever. And even if he is stressed, he certainly doesn't portray that, like put that on any of us that makes us feel panicked. It's like, oh gosh, because it's a tough gig producing those boxing shows because they're so long. Quite often we're getting pictures from other broadcasters and we're all trying to marry it up, and then the timings of when the fighters walk, what we're showing, what we're not showing. And yeah, it's like that duck analogy, isn't it? Like on top it's like this, and sometimes underneath it's like, oh, but no one knows it because Jason, who steers the ship, is just so constant, consistent, and calm. And that helps us all. So yeah, it's just a really great team. I just love it.
Yeah, it comes across, and as far as the on-screen talent, particularly when it comes to, as we mentioned, Frampton and Bunt, you hit the nail on the head there. Is not only are they excellent at what they love what they do as well, and that really comes across. In your role as the presenter, I always find that you tee them up with the right sorts of questions to bring out the best aspects of their personality, and foster that sort of atmosphere where it is fun. Um, but it's not just entertaining, it's insightful. And for people such as myself, even if I'm providing the social coverage, you're always looking to learn more about the sport. And you certainly do with those two lads. How do you
Yeah.
balance that chemistry? And is that something that you're always conscious and looking to do before broadcasting?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. Look, I think I kind of when I came in, I was like, I am a guest in their sport, sort of thing. Like I have never professionally boxed or anything like that. I love the boxing, and I knew I had a good knowledge, but I knew I had so much more to learn. Um, but when I just first met them both, they were just so welcoming that I was like, oh, these guys are great. But I did definitely like harbor the relationship, if you know what I mean. And I mean that in terms of I actively wanted to have a good relationship with the both of them. Um, and you build that outside of fight nights as well. Like it's not just about when you come on air. It's like when you just become friends with people and you test the water to see if people want to be friends type thing. And these two just were so open with that and so generous. And to the point where, yeah, you WhatsApp and you talk about things away from boxing, and then that builds a better relationship when you are on screen. And Carl had a testimonial for one of an anniversary of one of 20 years since he fought Kiko Martinez, I think it was. So he invited like all of us, the boxing team, to Ireland to his testimonial, and myself, Bunsey, um, another important part of TNT, a lady called Kim Fitzsimmons, Jason, and we all flew to Ireland, and it was so lovely that he invited us, and we wanted to be there to support him as a friend. And then that you just sort of build that relationship because then you've got if you hang out outside of the sport, you've also got other things that are relatable that you can talk about whilst you're on the air, and it shows that you are genuine friends, and it's not just like for TV. It's like, no, we actually all genuinely like each other, we all genuinely get on, we have a fun time, we speak outside of boxing. So then when the boxing comes together, it's just kind of like, and I openly will say, like, I rely on their knowledge, and I ask them if I don't know something, I'll just voice note them and just be like, hey, what's the situation here? Or like, what's the backstory here? How did that work? Or like, Carl, when you fight and you're in fight week, what are you thinking on this day compared to the fight when you get to it on Saturday? Or like, have you had this? Or what's with the gloves? So like, I have no shame. I'm not like, oh, I don't want them to think I don't know the answer. I'm like, nah, screw that. Get as much knowledge as you can. And quite often I'll say to them, they're the experts. I'm like, what do you want to talk about here? I'll throw in suggestions and be like, oh, I think we should do this, or should we tee it up with this? But I'll be like, what did you make of that? What was in that fight? What are the talking points here? And we'll kind of come up with it together. And then I tee them up and we talk about it, and it is what it is. But yeah, we try to make it informative, entertaining, and just have a good time. It's not a chore. This job is not a chore. These boxing events are not a chore.
Yeah, and I mean, you hit the nail on the head there in terms of I wanted to talk about you being well the skill of adaptability there, and When you said previously that in terms of you felt like a stranger coming into the sport and that you'd never boxed before, I think that is a testament to you in your role, in that your inquisitiveness and genuine curiosity comes across, which I think is one of the cornerstones of what makes an excellent reporter or presenter. So that really does come through. And it's not just this that you work on the football, and there, whilst there are similarities because especially coming from this part of the country, people love the football, people love the boxing, but I would argue with the football, if you are in a TV role, asking questions, there's a bit more to be considered in terms of you might maybe offend the fan base or something of that nature.
Yeah.
In terms of balancing the demands of both sports, how valuable is it to be versatile in your job?
Yeah, definitely. And I think you've got to be versatile in your job across the type of role that you do. And there's a lot of stuff within this job that is out of your control, which also means you have to be sort of versatile. So if we take it from a broadcast point of view, so yeah, I report and present because you want to be as versatile as possible. There are other people in this industry that present and commentate and, all sorts. So I think if you can widen your skill set to as broad as you can possibly be, it makes you one more employable, and two, one thing helps another thing. Like, so yes, now I am doing the presenting, but the fact I reported for so many years on the football across a ton of different leagues, from the National League to now doing the Champions League, I feel like it makes me a better presenter, because it's a fine balance. We're employed as presenters because we have a certain skill, and that skill is that you can listen to 6 or 7 voices in your ear at one time whilst steering a conversation, whilst keeping and being able to like turn a corner or adapt to situations around you whilst keeping a show on air. And you have to then balance that with the knowledge that you have of the said sport or the said thing that you are presenting. So it's a really, really fine balance between what they employed you to do. That's why, like, ex-players, apart from like Alex Scott, I can't think of too many that are actually presenters, because the skill of a presenter is really quite unique. But a ton of people become pundits because they know and love how to talk about sport, which is great. So you just have to be, I think, the other aspect of this is rights are constantly changing, constantly changing. So I always say this, no job is ever truly yours. You get to look after it for a bit and you do the best that you possibly can with it, but it's never truly yours, because you will get to do something for a certain period of time, and the rights, what they call, who gets to show the fights or the football on whatever channel, they change every 3 to 5 years. Or they go out for what's called tender, and then everybody has to bid for the rights again to own it. So you can be cruising along thinking, oh, got this sorted here. I'm doing X, Y, Z. This is great. And suddenly it can be taken away from you in the space of one day and one phone call when they didn't get the rights again. And then you go, oh my God, I've just gone from like a ton of jobs to no jobs. So I think you've just got to make yourself as versatile as possible, as employable as possible. Absorb yourself in every single sport that you do. If you love it, it's really not hard to do that, because you want to learn, you are inquisitive, you want to be better, and use the resources that you have around you from the experts, so to speak, in that sport. So in the boxing, it's Carl and Bunsey. In the football, I have like, there are like all the guys that we work with and the girls, the pundits and everybody, ask them. Yes, of course, I have a great knowledge of football, and it's something that I have loved since I was a child, but ultimately I'm never going to know more than a manager stood in front of me. So I don't try and challenge that either. I try and facilitate more. What would a fan want to know about this? I also try to never ever give my opinion, because who cares about my opinion? And also, like, can I back up what I'm saying? Why am I asking that question to that person? Do I have a reason for asking it? So if they fire back and they're like, well, what do you mean? I know exactly what I mean, and this is the reason why. So I think it's just about, like, I'm not trying to challenge anybody, or I'm just trying to facilitate conversations. It's not about me. It's not about the presenter or the reporter. It's always about the person that you're asking. So in a weird way, my job is to steer the conversation, but say as little as possible and get the most out of other people that I can, is how I look at it.
Yeah, that's a common theme there. I hear from a lot of the presenters that I've talked to is it's almost like that sort of dissolving your own ego because it's not about you. It's
Not at
about
all.
that you're speaking to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that brings me nicely to I wanted to talk about interview styles in a way because whenever the shoots come through and you're interviewing whoever the subject is, I'm always made up because I quite like that. You of course have put it in a nutshell there, but that interview style of kind of putting the onus on them and exploring their sort of headspace or exploring how they view the subject of discussion. I think as a reporter or as someone asking questions is always the best way to go about things. I think back to an interview of yours with Ruben Amarin, which is a good example of how you're able to ask tough questions whilst not just being respectful but passionate about what you're talking about. Um, because as I'm sure you'll have come across, there are a number of no nonsense types across every sport, really. So how have you found the challenge of contending with people who can be maybe difficult? And when it comes to like establishing your interview style, are there anything you do to sort of change it depending on the person that you're talking to?
No, I don't change my interview style because I am who I am. And I have to be me when I go into those rooms with these people. And I can't be anything else but that because then you become disingenuous. And so the way I talk to you is exactly the same way that I would talk to any player, boxer, manager, like exactly the same, exactly the same. What you do have to do is you learn how people react and you learn their personalities and what they're about. You have to be conscious of the moment that certain people are in as well. So you do have to have some sort of awareness as to what moment these people are in. Um, Honestly, being a Premier League manager, I mean, 20 people get to do that job. 20 in the entire world. 20 people get to be a Premier League manager. And it is the most stressful, under pressure, public facing, public scrutiny job that you would ever undertake. You are also being asked the same questions about 16 times by the different broadcasters because everybody gets to have a bite of the cherry because they all fund the project and all this type of stuff. So through TV, right? So I try to bear stuff like that in mind. It's never personal, ever. You cannot take things personally. Um, People are not going to be happy and smiley all the time, and that's okay. Like, and I think it's really important to remember that you're not friends with these people. You may develop some sort of not even a relationship really. I like, yeah, a respectful working relationship is what you hope you to develop with these people. But you never go in there being like, oh yeah, we're mates and everything's good. We're not their mates. We don't know them personally. They're there to do a job and we're there to ask some questions. So look, the way I see it, I always try and bear that in mind. You learn to read people. So I know certain things where you're like, okay, if I ask that, I know he's going to react like that. And then once you've done that, you've lost that person. So let's not go in with that. I think we should start here and then, bring it round to this. Or if you have to ask a difficult question, I always put my questions through three filters. Is it fair? Is it fair that I ask this person that question? Is it fair? The second one is my opinion in that question? Because if it is, take it out. No manager cares what my opinion is. No person listening cares what my opinion is. Why is my opinion God sent and, everybody else, my opinion is not a word. So take my own opinion out. Leave it fairly open-ended if you can, because then you just let that person speak and they can answer in whatever way they choose to answer it. And then the third question is, can I back it up? So if I have to ask a question and they come back to me and they say, why are you asking that? Like, what's the point? What do you mean? If they get a bit defensive, then you can kind of say, well, it's because X, Y, and Z happened and you've got a reason for it. So I think as long as I have those three filters in my head, I am just me. I'm not somebody that like, oh God, I'm terrible at social media. I'm not written press. I don't write things. And look, I have respect for those people that have to do that job as well because that's what they do. And And you just kind of hope that you can build like a respectful working relationship whilst getting the answers and the content that you need in sort of the best and least painful way possible for everybody involved, I think is how I'd say that.
No, that's really solid advice, and I'm really grateful that you shared that. And it's kind of got me thinking in terms of you spot on in terms of what you say to someone and how their brain works. So as an interviewer, you almost need to take that into consideration in terms of the answer. You almost not the answer that not as a question is going to shape the answer entirely, but you get a sense of how they react to certain things.
Yeah, and you could ask a question and you're like, well, hang on, what do I think the response will be to that question? So if you ask a really obnoxious question, what do you think the response to that is going to be? No one's going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, like it's going to be an obnoxious answer. And then you're on the back foot because you're like, well, I've lost this now completely. And they're just going to give one or two word answers until the end. It's going to be really awkward. And then I've just annoyed that person to high heaven. So you have to find a way to ask difficult questions, but frame it in the correct way that doesn't feel like you're attacking a certain human being. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to do a job. So I think, and the other thing I would say is do your research. My God, do your research. Like, do your research. Have the respect to the person that you are speaking to, that you have done the research as to whatever that may be about them, about their club, about their last fights, about just do the research. There is nothing worse, and there's nothing more exposing as a presenter or a reporter when somebody answers something and you think, I don't know what you're talking about. Oh my God, I didn't read this clearly enough. I don't know. I don't know. And then you're almost a bit like, oh no, where do I go? So honestly, knowledge is power. I will say that.
I've been in a press conference before where a person asking a question used a statistic, but ultimately got the statistic wrong, and it just completely backfired in their face. So that's an example of another example I would say of how, doing.
Also, when people use statistics, be really careful of that. A manager knows exactly what their stats are for various things. You don't always have to reinforce it. That's a really good example of what I mean. Can I back it up? So if you say something about, I mean, I'm trying to think of an example for you. Okay. Villa fans will probably be annoyed that I'm using this as an example, but it doesn't matter. Like last night, there was an error that led to a goal. That's the 12th time this season there's been an error in the back line that's led to an Aston Villa conceding a goal. So then you sort of go to the interview post-match and you say to Unai, look, there was, you're building this new team. You're getting the goals up front now, but that back line, yes, I appreciate you've got a ton of injuries. So you give them that kind of, if they want to use that as a justification, you're kind of putting it out there saying, I've done my research. I know you've got injuries. However, the fact that you've conceded another goal through your own error, is that something that's just an individual thing? Or I don't need to say to him, you've conceded 12 goals this season because of your own mistakes in that back line. He's like, yeah, I know. And who are you to kind of say that to me type thing? So you just have to think about the way that you frame the question, do your research as to the context around it. So yeah, it's hard, but it's doable.
It's part of the job. Has there ever been somebody that you've interviewed where maybe the interview itself's taken a turn that you didn't expect, but
Yeah, but again, it's never personal. It's never about me. It's not. They're not having a go at me. I will say the most difficult post match interviews the most difficult interviews you do are always post match, after a game, after a team that has lost, and they've perhaps maybe lost, and there's been a controversial decision or something. They didn't get a decision, or they missed a last minute sitter, or there's high emotion games are that. And post match in the tunnel, people can be annoyed about things during the game. And, these are top tier professional athletes with a lot of pressure on their shoulders. And, sometimes it's the difference between being safe from relegation or like pressure from the board. If somebody's coming under some pressure from the fans and the management, these decisions like literally change lives. So you can completely understand that sometimes people are annoyed. And sometimes, can you imagine having a bad game and then someone standing in front of you going, that was a bit rubbish. Why was it rubbish? Why were you rubbish today? And you don't use those words, but that's effectively what didn't happen today. Why didn't it work? You'd just be like, I want to talk to you about this right now. Like, go away. So yeah, there's definitely been situations where people, and it's more the, what do you mean by that? I've had some people ask my opinion, which again is a really interesting one because as a reporter, technically, I'm not really supposed to give my opinion. It's very difficult when somebody's like, well, do you think it was a penalty? And you're like,
Not the point, yeah.
yes, I do, but if I say it, it's gonna like annoy this. So you always have to come up with ways just being like, well, I'll be interested to see what the PGMOL have to say about it, type thing. So, and look, sometimes I think it is becoming more relaxed where you can sort of go, yeah, I probably think it was a penalty now. And I think that comes though with having more confidence in yourself and more confidence in your ability. But I always just try and give people as well, like the benefit of the doubt. It's never personal. If an interview goes a bit awry, it's like, okay, maybe you're just having a bad day today. And I've just taken the hit on whatever that was, and that's okay. It happens. It doesn't always make you feel great afterwards. Don't get me wrong. I'm not completely immune to everything, but it's very few and far between, and it only tends to happen after games, I would say, and when it's been like a real high emotion, high intensity game.
Yeah, a good shot. But I was going to say, has there ever been one where you kind of managed to steer it back to safety and get on the right side by the end of the interview?
Yeah, because if you can back up what you're saying, a manager will, or a player will respect that, and they'll go, "Okay, fine, I get what you're saying," and then they bring it back round. So yes, absolutely. That you can steer it back round, and that's what I always mean about can you back it up? Because if you can't back it up, you've lost it. If you can back it up, and they go, oh, okay. I don't really have a response to that because I fired it back at you. You've replied to me. It's like, oh right, okay, fine. We'll just carry on as it is, type thing. So yeah, you can pull them back round. You can pull them back round for sure, for sure. And sometimes just throw in the odd compliment there, here or there or whatever, and then you're like, oh, but
Yeah.
it comes back around full circle. I've never had anything where it's left me like purely traumatized, where I've been like, I'm never doing that again. That was so horrible, so hard. Like, no, not at all. Not at all.
Excuse me. I just think like because obviously in my experience of doing podcasts and interviewing people in the past and things like that, there are definitely like differences in personalities, as you touched on before, which can sometimes make the fluidity of the interview a little bit rigid.
Of
Uh,
course.
which, on the other side of that coin, it is one of the reasons why we love what we do when you come across somebody where that personality style sort of gels and it becomes like a wonderful interview. So, in terms of, because I'm sure at this point you've interviewed so many people in your career, are the people that you've come across that you just kind of really like the way their brain works and you could just sit and talk to them for days about whatever it is?
Yeah, but I feel like I'm very lucky that I work with the people at the top end of their sports. So they've already got something that is fascinating about them to sit and talk to because people only ever see the end product. No one sees what goes into actually getting to that end product. No one sees the journey that people go on. People just sometimes think it's an overnight success. Some people think, they're just at the top of their game and I don't know, magically they were just dropped there and that's what happened. You never get to see the journey of somebody. So everybody's story is so fascinating that whenever I get in front of anybody, yeah, I would sit and talk to them for hours if I could, just about all sorts of things. Because also, as I said to you, like knowledge is power. So I want to draw as much as I can from that person to help myself in a weird way in like dealing with certain situations or understanding certain things, how professional football clubs work, how top level boxing works, all this type of stuff. So, oh my God, yeah, it's fascinating to sit and talk to these people. Honestly, it's amazing. You only ever get like 10 minutes tops with any of these people. But the 10 minutes that you get, you try your best to get the best.
Ever compress you for somebody you enjoy talking to the most, or at least your most favorite interview that you've had with someone? Is there anything that springs to mind?
I really appreciate like when you ask a question, if somebody actually answers it. Um, and people can choose to respond to people in whichever way they want. And I always feel at the minute, Ruben Amorim, he responds. You ask him a question, he'll tell you the answer to the question that you're asking, and you feel like you get something from him. And I actually came across him. I interviewed him in his last sporting game when they were playing Man City, the Champions League, just earlier this season. And that was the first time where I met him. And he gave me, like, he was so generous with his time and the way he answered the questions and spoke to me. I thought, oh, you're a bit different. Like, you are different. And I don't know if when just people have done so much of this media content that actually when it gets to the later years of the career, they're just all a bit over it. And they're like, don't want to speak, don't want to say anything. Whereas Ruben, I feel, especially when he was leaving Sporting, it was such an exciting time for him to come to United. So he was quite keen and quite eager. But I feel like every time I see him, I'm like, oh, I feel like he'll give you a good chat. Will Ruben? But you know what? There's a ton of people. I had an incredible season with West Ham, and I feel like I built a really respectful relationship with David Moyes throughout that run. And, you know, I feel like that potentially was a challenge at the beginning. I felt like I really wanted to work hard to earn his respect because he's such a like footballing icon, really, with everything that he's done in his career, playing wise and now managerial, and the teams he's been, the experience that guy has, and like obviously he just lives and breathes football. So that was sort of like a different way of approaching it a little bit with David. Um, and then player wise, yeah, it's just great when you just get players that just are great talkers. But there's different personalities that you get, and you always try to remember, like, if a player isn't great at talking, maybe they're just painfully shy, and they actually are just not really that comfortable in speaking in front of the media. So as I say, you just I try not to change. I try to remain consistent. So when a manager comes in, they know what they're going to get from me. They know. And then that hopefully puts them at ease.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you think that experience you had with Ruben Amorim, um, in his final game at Sporting, because as you say, in a language that isn't his first language, he articulates himself so well and is so honest, which I think is such an admirable trait for anyone to have, really, but especially in this industry. But do you think that helped you when it came to talking to him again more recently? In
Yeah, definitely, because he remembered me from a start. He was like, hey, he was like, oh my gosh. I said, yes, I did your last interview with Sporting. And he was like, I remember. He was like, how are you? And so that gives you something already then, because you've got common ground. And it kind of relaxes him a little bit more because he's like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I know who you are, and learning stuff like that. So yeah, if you can get anything like that, that definitely helps for sure. But look, I just try to remain consistent with who I am and the type of question that I ask. I am far more of a conversational person than like I ask a question, you ask a question, I ask a question, you answer it. Like, that's just not me. I just prefer a conversation with somebody, and however that conversation goes, we just follow that path. I adapt to the conversation as it needs be. I try not to think, well, these are my questions and that's it. It's also really important that I listen to what they're saying. Because if you in your head, because sometimes it can happen where you're nervous about going into an interview or a situation, like it happens. You can get nervous, and that's good to be nervous, and it's okay to be nervous. But what's not good is when it tips into, well, these are my questions that I need to remember, and these are what I need to ask. And then and a certain fighter, player, or manager is responding to you, and you're just not listening to what they're saying, because in your head you're like, okay, just ask the next question. The next question is this question. And you're not listening to what they're saying back to you to be able to adapt and respond to have that conversation, rather than, okay, that was my first question. This is my second question. This is my third question. It's like, no, just listen to what they're saying. Trust your own knowledge on what you're talking about. And at the end of the day, it's just a conversation about football or boxing.
Yeah, I think that's it. Honestly, in terms of your interview style, You're a conversationalist, so it takes a very conversational tone, but you're also an excellent listener, which allows for whoever you're interviewing to also have just as much of an input in terms of the exchange, which going back to what you said earlier in terms of research, like 100%, like I've literally been a researcher in a previous job role, so I do know the importance of dedicating a lot of time just to giving your brain the fuel that it needs to go into situations armed correctly. Because of that interview style, does that impact the research? Because as we said earlier, for example, if you're trying to hit somebody with statistics, that can come across very cold. Uh, so in terms of you harnessing the knowledge that you do have, obviously you've got fantastic people around you, as you say, the pundits that you can sort of bounce ideas off and pick the brains of. Or how do you approach research as a task almost?
Um, it is that. It is a task. You're like, okay, to be able to do that job, I spend so for example, this Saturday we're doing the boxing. I will spend probably the rest of today doing the research for that boxing. It's funny, as a presenter or a reporter, I try and get close as I possibly can to 100% knowledge. That's never going to happen. You're never going to have 100%, but just say I can get as close as I can to having as much knowledge as possible. I will probably only actually speak about 10% of that knowledge when it actually comes to it on the night. But I have the other 90% in my locker in case something hits the fan and I have to fill and I have to cover something or I have to pick something up and you have to fill for a certain period of time. And that's when you go, okay, this is the knowledge that I have in my locker that I've done. So you actually have to sit down and actually really, it's sort of funny, like you are constantly absorbing information, whether it's on the radio or on the TV, whether it's on social media, you are constantly absorbing the kind of the top lines of what is happening within the clubs, within the fights, within the players, all the time. But then you really have to sit down and go specifically to a specific game or a specific fight card. And that's when you have to really hone in on the individual knowledge. So it's a lot of retaining information, getting rid of it quickly after you've done said thing, because chances are you're on to the next thing already. But then not getting rid of it so much that in 3 weeks' time, when you come back to doing said team, said player, said fighter again, you go, oh, hang on a minute, I've got that knowledge just stored somewhere in here a little bit. Let me just pull it out again. And then, so it's sort of like you absorb information all the time, but you absolutely have to sit down to then hone in the specifics of the fight or the game. But I would say I try and get 100% knowledge, but I personally would only ever say 10% of that knowledge on there.
Yeah. That I was going to say, just in terms of like how it differs, say, for example, you talked earlier about people who are in written journalism, there's obviously radio. You've really specified there what it's like in terms of expressing your knowledge through the format of TV, because I assume that is very different to if somebody's in radio or if somebody's written work.
Yeah, they're very, very different mediums, very different. Um, I think if you just look at the media outlets that you've got, so you look at channels that roll 24/7 and need news headlines to go along with the content that they're putting out. You're going to approach things differently to if you are just a sports channel that develops and does one game. You know, I think the guys that write, I have maximum respect for them because I have no idea how they churn out so much information like all the time, every single day. And you have to have a different angle or a different storyline and sometimes it's hard for those guys because they're like, there hasn't really anything happened, what we're going to write about here. So I think, yeah, it's the approaches are very different. And that's where I think it is on I think to be a successful athlete, I think these days you can't just be an athlete. It's kind of like, well, you have to do your due diligence a little bit. What organization are you speaking to? What is their output? What and sometimes the media can be a help to a certain player manager so it's kind of like, well, they can be a bit strategic in what they're thinking. Some people just do not care, and that's not a problem at all. I just think I just think having the knowledge to know what each broadcaster, you have to know 100%, but just have a rough idea what each broadcaster, what is their output? Because I think you get different responses and answers if people understand that. And
Yeah,
I think that's on a club and the media managers to manage that, to relay that to their players, to their managers, because yeah, they're just worried about their games and their football, but there has to be that relationship between the media and the clubs or the fighters. So somebody needs to manage that role and just kind of get a real understanding of what each broadcaster does and what the output is.
especially in this day and age, given how, especially, football is the prime example of this, the Premier League, how intertwined the relationship is between the sport itself and broadcasters and the media now. It's almost interdependent to a certain extent, which
Well, it's all to do with money as well. They tender out the broadcast rights, and people are paying millions upon millions of pounds.
yeah,
So it's a really fine balance between, you know, football would exist without media, but it wouldn't exist at the level it exists at without media. And it's sort of like both both use each other for their benefit, if you know what I mean. So you just sort of have to find a common medium. But ironically, the people at the top are not really the people that get caught in the crossfire. It ends up being the reporter or the presenter that gets put in front of the boxer, the manager, or the player, and they have to bear the brunt of an unhappy scheduling, or they have to bear the brunt of a fan base that is like, why are we playing at this time when we are 400 miles from the location? And half the time I'm sat there going, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. I don't know either why that's happening. And but it's also absolutely so beyond our control that that is dealt with at the top level, but those top level are never forward facing, so you kind of have to like navigate that aspect of things going, well, oh god, this isn't me, like we didn't want to play this game either because we had another game and it goes up against that, so for the broadcaster it doesn't work, but this is what the league said that we had to do, so we're just doing what we're told effectively. So it's a really strange dynamic where I guess everybody's just got their own best interests at heart. And you just have to try and navigate that bit the best that you can. Because
yeah,
sometimes decisions are totally out of your control. And what's funny is like sometimes I find out things from social media. Like a game that I'm working on, I'm like, oh, the kickoff time's moved. And like it's gone out on social before anybody from like who I work for has managed to get an email to say. So a lot of the time I find out a lot of things on socials that I was like, oh, okay. Like for example, the Stevenson fight this weekend, obviously that's now off. I mean, I found out from social. I was like, oh my God, okay. So then I'm then on social, like trying to research it. And I know Jason's in the background trying to figure out what's happening and he's waiting for, other people. And then obviously Josh Padley's got the call up, which amazing, super happy for him because I saw him, I think he beat Mark Chamberlain at the Dubois AJ. So, which for him is now life changing, which is amazing. But I found that out on social. So a lot of time it's kind of like, guys, we're all in the same boat here, like all in the same boat.
yeah. This is really interesting to me. This is absolutely fascinating, and I want to kind of bring it back a little bit to uh, not interview styles. You said there that certain broadcasters or outlets can almost do whoever they are interviewing a favor. And on the note of the importance of social and digital in the age that we live in now, do you find as an interviewer a difference in speaking to people who were around pre-social media and post-social media?
Um, how do you mean?
Just in terms of how they interact with you, maybe on a conversational level, how the interview flows, the type of answers that you get from them.
Well, I think it depends what the topic of the interview is, to be honest, because if it is an interview for digital and social, it will tend to be more set up that it's more fun, informal, relaxed because people like that behind the scenes content type thing. Um, if you are presenting at a game, the kind of structure of the game is still the same, and then they pull clips off and put that on social media. So I will say social media, I mean, I don't know if I love it or I hate it, to be honest. You feel like you one slip of the tongue, one mistake from somebody clipping it and putting it on socials, and then you just getting like destroyed for something that you just like, oh my God, like didn't even mean it like that. It was just a slip of the tongue. The word came out wrong, like, and people are like all over it in a second. But then the flip side to that is you can have these moments that are amazing that go viral, and you're like, oh my God, that's so cool. Like that just happened. So do I find it's changed? Uh, I mean, I think like footballers, period, have changed, but that's only speaking from the guys who I now work with to the guys that play. You know, I sit and talk to Rio, and he's like, we didn't have any social media back in the day, just like didn't exist. Like nobody knew what we were up to. And I think everything's just so accessible now that I just think the players, and they're getting younger and younger as well, you know, like you're talking to like 17, 18-year olds, you're like, oh my God, I feel so old now. Um, they grew up in a digital generation, so no different. But I wouldn't say no. I mean, to be honest, what the lifespan of a player or a boxer? I know Derek Chisora is like knocking 40, but fair play to him. I don't know how he does it at that age. But the lifespan of a player is kind of like you're done by the time you're 30. I want to say that, you know, 30 to 35, and I feel like we're past the point now where social media is new. So people change. Like everybody coming through now is of that generation of just social media. It's just always been there. Um, and I don't know any managers well enough to know their opinion on social media. I do know a lot of the time people say they don't have social media, but I know a couple of people that have got little burner accounts that do definitely have a little check.
Yeah, no, banner accounts are everywhere.
Yeah,
Listen,
it's kind of like, say you don't know anything, but I know you've seen this, or like they kind of don't actively partake in social media, but they definitely are across everything that happens on there, whether that's because their social media manager or, you know, the press officer has told them, or they have a little account themselves and they just have a little scroll just to check what people are writing and what they're doing. But I wouldn't say that anybody that I've come across has particularly changed for social media. I think everybody just hopes that just be your authentic self. Social media, it will do what it's going to do. You can't control it. It is what it is. So if you're just yourself, you know, hopefully you get by and you don't get cancelled.
yeah, I know. Tell me about it. I think that's
Well,
interesting new element. Well, we say new. I know obviously we've had it for God knows how many years now, but in terms of like being a broadcaster, how you do need to tailor your content, not just for television and streaming, but for social platforms now. How
definitely the way telly is going, like I have no qualms. I got made redundant twice in 3 years, not that long ago. And because I was working Premier League at Premier League Productions, and they had 7 days a week of TV programming, and then there was a decision to cut it down to four, and they were going to do way more stuff digital platform. And the days that I worked at Premier League, my days did not exist anymore, so I literally got fired. I had no idea it was coming, none. Um, and you like one Zoom just changed everything. I knew it wasn't good when my boss was on there, but also like his boss was on there, and I was like, I was like, this is not good. I was like, are we okay, guys? Turned out we weren't okay. Um, but social media is definitely a new platform now, and the way it's going for sure. And yeah, I think it's fun. I do think like these content creators are, I mean, fair play to them. It's hard work. I think being a content creator, it's not as easy as just like taking a camera and making some content and then sticking it on YouTube. Like these people think about their content and they curate it, and I do think it does add a fun aspect to the game for sure. I just always hope there is still a place for your solid games on the telly, your fights on the telly. Like, and I do think there will always be a place. I think there's room for everything. I just think we move and we adapt with it, type thing.
very fast-paced society now, though, isn't it? And maybe in comparison to changes that we would have seen maybe 15, 20 years ago, the pace at which changes happen now kind of
So
goes back to the
much.
adaptability thing we were talking about, that you just, as soon as a change happens, you need to just roll with the punches.
You do, you have to change, but you have to remain authentic to who you are and who yourself, like who you are and yourself. And as going back to my early point, no job is ever truly yours. You look after it for a bit. As soon as you start to feel comfortable in some aspect, you lose touch on the reality of what is happening within broadcast for sure. And look, there's all sorts of things coming on at the minute. These rights that all the TV companies have, they probably run till about what, end of 27 maybe, something like that, and then they all go again. And you are getting streaming giants that are coming in now that are wanting to stream, and that's not anything that we can control. That's just the way it's all going. So you just have to adapt. You've got a choice. You can either adapt, accept, and move with it, or you can dig your heels in and go, no, I don't want to do this. I think it's silly. But then you're going to limit your options massively, massively. So, but the other thing, social media could implode at some point. It could. It could, as quickly as it's arrived, it easily could fall off the other side. So I don't know what is next after social media. I'm not very entrepreneurial when it comes to technology. I've got no idea what's next, but oh, Lord knows. Well, we've started to see all these, like immersive screens that are in America now that are filming these games like you're at the ground. AI technology is moving on. Like you just have to adapt and move with it, but just remain true to yourself and hope that at the end of the day, just old-fashioned conversation will always remain.
Yeah, 100%. And look at it, maybe wrapping the podcast up now, going back to what you said there in terms of no job is ever truly yours. Whilst that is true, I still feel, because, a recurring theme of what you're saying is being authentic, being yourself, being genuine, which I think is huge. It comes through in your work, and you have, as mentioned, you've established yourself as one of the best reporters in the country, essentially, whether it's
Oh, no, definitely not. Definitely not.
you have, otherwise, to be honest, like, this is one of the reasons why I did want to sit and pick your brain, because of, you've established yourself as one of the best in the country of what you do. If you were to go back to when you were a kid, when you were a teenager maybe, and give yourself some advice for the journey that was to come, what would you say to yourself?
Don't worry as much. Oh my gosh. I stressed and worried about how I was going to get there. What was I going to do? And I wish that I never had, because it kind of all works out the way it's meant to in the end. And I think just by being happy in who you are, what you're doing, give your best, and that is enough. That is enough. And I think, you know, don't take things too personally. And whatever will be, will be. I think sometimes we're obsessed with having a plan of like, and you've got goals, you've got dreams, you've got ambitions, but I do wish that I hadn't spent as much time being as stressed and being like, yeah, but how am I going to do this? I really want to do this, and I don't know how to. And like, how do you get experience? But no one's giving you a chance to get experience. And like, still to this day, I don't really know how it's all worked out, but it has. And I went through two redundancies in 3 years. One when I was working on radio for a big radio network at Heart, and then two when I was working for Premier League Productions. And both those times I was like, oh my God, okay, I'm at Heart now. This is great. This is where it's all going to like take off from here. And then I got Premier League and I was like, oh my God, here we go. And both those times, those things were pulled from beneath me within the space of a phone call or a meeting. And you are left going, well, now what happens? Well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And you can either let that define you, or you can use it and go, okay, this is not going to define me. This is just another step in the chapter. So I do wish that I'd just been like, if I could say something to myself now, I'd be like, you're okay. Like, don't stress. You're good. You've remained true to who you are. You're a kind person. You try to help as much as you can other people. For me, that's more important. I'd much rather somebody be like, if someone like thought of my like, oh, Becky Ives, oh, she's a really nice girl, she's really helpful, she's I would much prefer that as a character than someone be like, oh yeah, she's good at what she does, but she's a bit like, oh, she's very difficult to work with, isn't she? It's like, oh God. It's like, nah. Like, I just think you've got to remember the wider things in life sometimes. Work is amazing and it is great, but it is not the be all and end all. I think character is far more important than a piece of paper or where you may end up.
Yeah,
So yeah, I would just say to myself, don't stress as much. You'll be fine. It's gonna be a wild ride, but you're gonna love it.
yeah. No, that's a good shout, and I think it all rings true, to be honest, because as I say, it comes across. One of the reasons why I like it as much as I do as an interviewer, and I think that many other people do, is because that genuine character does come through, and you come across as a lovely person whilst also being excellent at your job.
Oh, thank you. That really, yeah, God, thanks. That really means a lot. Thank you. That's so kind of you. So kind of you.
Absolute pleasure to talk to you. It's been fun. I've really enjoyed it. Smash this weekend, and if any and ever like the chance comes up, any of the cards, any of the big games, it'd be great to get you on here again.
Oh my God, 100%. I would love to be back with you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.